Hey guys, it's Holly Tate, Vice President of Business Development here at Vanderbloemen. And today I am honored to be joined by two friends that I just admire and so respect in the ministry space. So first I've got Sean Palmer, who is my pastor. This is so exciting for me, Sean. Sean is a teaching pastor at Ecclesia Houston, here in Houston. I've got my poster here representing H-Town.
That's right, the flood zone.
That's right, yes, absolutely. And Sean is also a preaching and speaking. I need coaching on speaking, apparently. Preaching and speaking coach, as well as an author. Sean, you've got your hands on a lot of things, but you're also on the board of 1128 Ministries, which I have Rhesa Higgins here with us, who is the founding director of 1128 Ministries. So Rhesa, I would first love to turn it over to you. Would love to hear a little bit of your story. And if you could just share a bit, I know we're going to dive in a lot into your specialty at 1128, but just share with us who you are and what brought you to found 1128 Ministries.
Sure. Well, first, I'm really excited to get to be here. It's good to see your face and get to be with friends, even over screens. So I'm a trained spiritual director, and 1128 Ministries is the nonprofit that grew out of a desire to support ministers and pastors in their own spiritual lives. When I was doing my spiritual direction training, there was this wild, crazy, God-ordained, I name it now, turn of events that led us to recognize this is a huge need for so many that are in ministry to have someone who's supporting their own spiritual well-being. And so we said, okay, we'll say yes. As God keeps bringing the next thing, we say yes. And right now, that means that we are serving church leaders that are all over the country. That we have several continents represented of missionaries that we support, and it is just a true honor for us to get to be present to those who are pouring their lives out into a local body.
That's awesome. We're so grateful for that. And Sean, share a little bit of your story and what caused you to be on the board and really a fan and supporter and cheerleader is the word that's coming to mind in the best way of 1128 Ministries.
Well, Holly, I've been in vocational ministry for something like 22 years now, and it doesn't take very long once you're in ministry to realize ministry by nature is self-giving, and you're pouring out all the time. And there aren't actually a lot of resources, at least ongoing resources, for people who are pastors, women and men who minister in local congregations, to be pastored themselves and to have time for spiritual reflection and to be trained and guided. And of course, there are conferences you can be a part of, there are trips you can take, but those really didn't serve me well and the people that I knew in ministry very well. And I thought, when I saw an opportunity to be a part of something that could have an ongoing life force in the local church, that's something that we really should invest in, particularly for those of us who are in churches that aren't connected to a large national or international denominational body that has those resources embedded in what they do. So a couple of years ago, Rhesa reached out to me and asked me if I'd be interested in joining the board. I thought it was a fabulous idea. It was a great time for me to do so. And we continue to be able to serve people in ministry all over the world in the nonprofit sector and churches. And it's just been a tremendous blessing. So that's why I do it, as a way to give back to my fellow pastors.
Well, I'm so grateful for 1128 because in our work at Vanderbloemen, all day, every day, we are talking with candidates in ministry who, a lot of them are feeling burnout or frustrated. They're grieving something that has happened to them in ministry, and they're not sure what that next step should be. And so we've kind of become this place of counseling that we never even dreamed that we would be, just because we are a safe place for folks to come and talk about their transitions in ministry. And that often turns into conversations about, what we're going to talk about today, which is how in the world do I process and think about grief and trauma that's happened to me in my own ministry or pastoring. And so what you guys are doing is so, so important, and we're grateful for you. So I invited you guys to join me to talk specifically about this heavy topic of grief. I got an email from somebody in our Vanderbloemen community who is an executive pastor, and was just sharing how he and his lead pastor and so many on their staff are experiencing the cycle of grief. And for folks who might not have experienced grief before, it can be confusing and hard to navigate. And for a lot of pastors, it's just hard to admit, because a lot of pastors feel like they have to have all the answers and they have to be strong. But this is a time where we're all experiencing so many different emotions. And I often feel the different cycles of grief throughout the day in one day. So Rhesa, I would love to hear from you. Let's just first talk about, what is grief? How do you describe the experience of grief?
Yeah, so I think that grief is a full personhood experience. You don't just experience grief as an emotion, you experience it in your body, you experience it in your mind. And it's this process that we have to walk through in order to heal a wound or a loss. And so often I think we try to say, well, grief is about if you lose somebody that you love, well, of course you would grieve that. Yes. And when you expected to go on vacation in June and that gets canceled, you're going to grieve that too. When you expect for your church to be together for Mother's Day or Senior Sunday or baby dedication or all of it, you're going to grieve that because they're losses.
That's so good. Sean, you are a pastor, in the pulpit each week, or on the pulpit screen each week. So I would love to hear from you, if you don't mind sharing, what are some of the losses that you're feeling right now, or that you might be grieving right now as a teaching pastor?
Yeah, well, to play off what Rhesa said, it's got this cascading effect. And as a church leader, you have all of your own losses, which I do want to talk about in a second, but you're also carrying the losses for everyone in your community, regardless of the size of that community. So you have seniors in high school or in college who aren't going to get the graduation that they worked for and dreamed of. You've got people who are genuinely getting sick and people who are dying. You've got people who you have done their premarital counseling with. They're not going to have the wedding that they envisioned. Then you've got your own stuff, right? Part of spiritual life, right, is to have a rule of life. Like all the great spiritual teachers would teach you to have a rule of life. And when I teach folks about spiritual rhythms, I ask them to create a rule of life. And part of that rule of life for me and for a lot is weekly participation in the corporate worship of the local church. And it's almost like a bedrock, and sharing in communion with those same people and the fellowship. And all of that gets stripped away immediately. So communion with our family, I tell you, I've got 2 teenage girls. Some weeks that's really good. Some weeks that is not really good, right? Then what my oldest daughter really loves in our community is serving communion, right? And at Ecclesia, we take by intinction. So she gets to pronounce the forgiveness of God over people. And she gets to do that with people that she knows and doesn't know. And I get to watch her do that, right? And so all of those little bitty things that we never think about that are just part of the whole matrix are all griefs, and they're all thrown in at the same time. And I don't even know that we know what all that we're grieving. The conversations in the hallway, saying hello at our place to a barista that you like, the music. What we have found is people really miss the corporate worship in terms of singing together. I think on the pastoral side, there is a part of us, and I've heard from my preaching clients, my speaking clients, one of the things that they miss is just preaching. And some of that, quite frankly, is ego and dopamine, right? You get the kick from doing it. And where else in our culture do hundreds or thousands of people stop and listen to you talk for 25 or 30 minutes, right?
It's so true.
That is And so this could actually be a really good time formatively for those women and men who have become too addicted to the charismatic moment, too addicted to preaching, who feel like it says something about who they are in the universe and their own word that's been overplayed. They might have needed that stripped from them in the first place so that they can fill it with the absolute presence and love of God and their wholeness in being loved by God. That's one side of it. The other side of it is that there are people who, like me, who feel very deeply in their bones that this is what God put you on the planet to do. Like, there is a sermon in my mind forming all of the time, 24 hours a day. And I just feel like for this season of my life, that's what God wants me to do. And when you're not able to do that, it's that fire in your bones that so many people have experienced when they are in a season where I know very much this is what God wants me to do, but I'm going to have to push pause or stop. And there's a grief that comes with that. It's a grief to be the kind of person who has dedicated your life to loving people up close and in person, and not to get to spend time with people, that you begin to crave just the presence of other people. And you are the kind of person, if you are a pastor, who wants to hug people and to get down on little kids' levels and talk with them and share life together. That's just part of who we are. It's part of our calling and vocation, and it's part of our rhythm of life. And when all that's gone at once, like, that is almost too much to even name all at once. So even for me, it feels like it's been a series of, oh, this is what I'm missing. Oh, this is what I'm missing. This is when we're doing online worship and our band is doing a song that I really love, that I get teary, not because of the nature of the song, but the nature of my community, the people who I harmonize life and this song with. So it's just a lot, and it's okay for it to be a lot. Church leaders do have to lead, right? But that leading can also be, we're going to figure this out together. It's a big loss for all of us. It's a grief for all of us. And I'm not going to go ahead of you and say, I'm not grieving and act like that, but I am going to walk alongside you and we're going to grieve this together.
That's so good. Now, Rhesa, you have your finger on the pulse of so many ministry leaders all over the country. So what else are you hearing? I mean, Sean, I loved just even hearing your passion, because you're sitting in that seat. So you feel it every day. You're experiencing those losses. Rhesa, what else are you hearing around the country as you're talking to ministry leaders as far as the losses that church leaders are feeling?
Yeah, there's a whole host of things that we're hearing from people. I would say some of the main ones that we're hearing are around, I'm used to being the expert in my own space. I'm in charge of this space. These are my people and this is what I do. And suddenly I don't have that authority. And it's not just about the control of that. It's about the identity of that. That's how I know myself. I think there's a really huge piece of this American identity about we're self-sufficient and we can do all our own things. And suddenly even our we're not self-sufficient. We've never have been. Suddenly that lie got exposed for all of the things that we know it is. But it's really uncomfortable to have it just thrown out. So if churches needed financial support from the government, if churches had to figure out how to completely shift the way that they did worship and had to get help for that, all of those, we are independent and can handle things on our own in 1,000 different little places. That identity got stripped away in a heartbeat. And that's great big. We're certainly hearing a lot of sadness around, I want to be with my people as they are celebrating these big life events and I can't be there. And also, how can I be someone's pastor who is in a health crisis when I'm not allowed in a hospital?
Yeah, that's so hard.
How do I know myself as a pastor if I can't be present with my people in their hard places? So we're hearing a lot of that. And then we're hearing just some of the things that Sean mentioned about just the simple routine of knowing this is what we're going to do. well, suddenly we don't know what we're going to do. Are we going to start back in a month? Are we going to start back in 3 months? Are we going to start? I don't know. And how do we continue to define routine around that? All of that produces a sense of grief in people of there's so much that feels like it got taken away so fast. And so now what do we do?
Yeah, that's so good. So Rhesa, that's actually the next question I was going to ask you. What do we do? So there's probably many people that are watching or listening to this right now that are resonating with everything you and Sean are saying, but what in the world should a pastor or church leader do with these feelings? How can they process this? What should that look like in a healthy, Christ-honoring way?
Yeah, so I think one of the important steps is to be able to separate your own personal experience of grief from what your congregation is experiencing. Not because they don't both need attention, but your job is to first tend to your own spiritual life, and grief is a piece of that. And so I think that's the first thing I would encourage people to do is really spend some time wondering, what is it that you are grieving? What are your losses that you've experienced? And there's this sense right now that we're all afraid to say the things we're really sad about losing because, well, it could be this bad. It could have been this thing that happened and that hasn't happened. And so just in the privacy of your own mind or your own journal, you can strip all that away. Name the things that you're sad about. We can't heal things that we haven't named yet. After that, there's a whole lot of science around what it means to grieve. And it is a process. But the process isn't a straight ladder that you do this thing and then this thing happens and then it doesn't work like that. We're a little more complex than that. And so I want to encourage people, hold yourself with a lot of grace around that. Don't just assume, well, if I'm angry today, then tomorrow it will be about bargaining because that's just the way the system. No, you can go through all of them like 12 times in a day. And that's normal. But the thing about grief is we have to come to terms with what it is that we lost. And then we have to be able to say, who am I without that thing? Am I still intact as a human being and in communion with God? And if that is the case, then we're able to say, okay, so this is what life looks like without that thing. One of the tricky pieces right now is that everything still feels like it's so up in the air. So have I actually lost this thing, or is it going to come back, or is it not? And how do I begin to do this emotional work? And so one of the things, that's one of the pieces about needing a lot of compassion, is it is all still up in the air. And at the same time, I think it's important to recognize and begin to start doing that separation work of, if I were to lose this, whatever this loss is that you're naming, who would I be? Am I still in communion with God? Do I still know myself as beloved? Do I still know myself as called to minister to the people of God? Okay, then I can begin to rebuild over here what I look like without this particular piece.
That's so good. Sean, a lot of lead pastors and executive pastors or teaching pastors, I mean, really senior leaders at churches, one of the things that we hear a lot is, which is why a lot of times we're called at Vanderbloemen, is they don't have anybody to talk to because, you know, their best friend is their coworker and their, you know, coworker is also in their small group or is on their elder board, and it can get really messy in ministry. So what would you say to folks that are listening that really do feel like, I need to process this, I need to talk to somebody, but I don't know who that should be?
Yeah, there are some resources out there. I mean, like 1128 is one. That's one of the reasons we exist. But also what I have found really helpful is, who are my compatriots in the pastorate, maybe people that I went to seminary with. I got a great call last night with a group of guys that I went to college with, as we kind of think through these things together and pray through them together. If there are people in your community that you feel like, I think in most churches, the reality is that senior leaders can only have a small group of people that they can trust with their interior world. And this might be a signal to many of us that we should have been cultivating that this whole time. And maybe that when we get restarted, whatever that means, or start now to begin to cultivate those kinds of relationships. But to surround yourself with a small group of people that you can deeply trust, who aren't invested in the decision that you make. The best people in my life are the people who do not care about my professional success, right? And so this is why people like me say everyone needs a therapist and a spiritual director, right? Because they don't care if your attendance at church is going this way or giving's going that way. Like, they are invested in you. And if you don't have that, times like this can be extremely hard, much harder than they have to be. So I would tell every senior leader, you have got to invest in a group of women, a group of men, one or two people maybe that you can trust implicitly, and to actually be honest. And this is where leadership, where all the platitudes of leadership come together. Because when you start to be honest, this is the time where leaders actually do have to go first. So it's going to take risk. Like, you're going to have to cultivate, find some people and say, hey, look, if we can't be real here together, then it's never going to happen in our church. Like, if there's no place for the leadership of this church to be honest and vulnerable, then nowhere in this church will people be honest and vulnerable. So now might be the time. Like, we've been trying, at least in our home, with all of the sickness and death that COVID has called, not to reframe all of this or to act like it's not happening, but to see it as a reboot. So one of the things about this is, hey, we actually get to pause and decide how we want life to look. And it's not just handed to us prefabricated. And for many of us, it's going to be like, okay, you know what? There's this one or two people in our church that I've had some really good conversations with that weren't just one-way pastoral, who seem to be used by God in a real way and know God in a really significant way. And I'm going to invest in them. And maybe just about this one thing. Maybe it's about, hey, I don't get in on the phone and say, I don't know what I think about reopening or the schedule for that. And I'm hearing this from these people and this from these people. Here are my concerns and fears about that. You're a thoughtful person. You're a godly woman. You're a good businessman. Tell me what you think. And maybe it's a different group of people for a different set of questions. Hey, let's talk to some really great moms and grandmas. Like, what would make you feel comfortable bringing your grandchildren, your children back into our spaces? Help me think through that. Here are my concerns about this. And for goodness sake, and this is one of the just odd tips that I give to my preaching clients, be a real person. Mm-hmm. Like, this is what I'm worried about. Like, this is my story. Like, just be a real person. For a minute, don't worry about the budget or the butts and seats, and be honest with yourself about what it is that you hope and fear, and see where that leads you. And try to listen to God as a human who is doing life with God, not as a woman or a man who's leading a church.
So good. That's awesome. Rhesa, tell us a little bit about 1128 Ministries and the services that you guys provide. If somebody's listening today that needs to talk to somebody, would love for them to be able to connect with you guys and learn a little bit more about how you serve the church.
Absolutely. So 1128 offers a lot of different services. One of them is one-on-one spiritual direction. So we have 5 spiritual directors on staff. All of us are working remotely now, so it's easy for anyone, anywhere to be in spiritual direction, and you schedule all of that directly on our website. I think we're going to link that, so that makes it super easy for you to find. We also work with small groups of ministers together. Right now, we have 6 covenant groups of women in ministry that have been meeting over the course of this year. And they invest in that kind of community that Sean was talking about, where I get to be real about what it is to live in this world of ministry with a group of people who understand that, and they commit themselves to deep friendship and to spiritual formation and to sharing wisdom together. We are talking about starting groups in the summer because this world is different than we've lived in before. And so if they're interested in that, our website's a great place to do that. We have a brand new resource that is literally coming out the day we're filming this.
I love it.
Yay, brand new resource. But it is an ebook that we've written for pastors in dealing with grief around COVID. And so we offer some guidance in naming some of that grief and understanding the process that you're going through, and then some spiritual practices, some ways to connect with God in the middle of the grief that allow you to kind of move into that second phase of who am I with God, even if I've had this loss. And so we've got a lot of tools that are in there. We would love for you and all of your community to have access to that. So it's really easy to find on our website.
Absolutely. And we're going to link all of that at the link. If you're watching this on YouTube, there will be a link to the blog post where we'll have all of these links. And if you're watching this on our blog, the links will just be right here below this video where you can go and download that resource. I'm so grateful that you guys are committed to putting that resource out there. I know that it's been a lot of hard work and very quickly putting it together, but I know it's going to help a lot of people really process this grief that they're experiencing as church leaders. And then Sean, where can folks learn more about you and your speaking and preaching resources? And excuse me, just choked on myself. Where can they learn more about you and connect with you, Sean?
Well, actually, I'm in all the places. So if you just look for Sean Palmer on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, wherever, I'm taking another cohort of speaking clients this fall. I usually take the summer off to be with family, but I've been with family a lot, so I might do something different here this summer. But doing a lot of writing right now. So I would be glad if people want to, especially through my Facebook site, which is just Sean Isaac Palmer. If you want to find me there, shoot me a message. Love to dialogue with people and to help talk them through. That's the way I'm doing that now. And then I do one-on-one coaching sessions that way. So, but I did want to mention one last thing, Holly.
Oh, yes, of course.
Because I had an incredible experience, a great pastoral experience this last Sunday. After our online worship services, we invite everyone who's watched them to hop on a Zoom call with pastors. And then we break them out into smaller groups. So it doesn't matter how many, hundreds, thousands, however many we get, then they break out. And I was sent to a room. I was designed to lead a room. It just happened to be that everyone in my room was served in our prayer ministry. So every Sunday when we're meeting corporately, there's a corner people can go to, and they'll be greeted by folks there and who will pray for them, and just all people in that prayer ministry. And we were talking and sharing, and one of them asked, as the people who spend the most time praying in your churches do, like she just asked how I was doing in a way that made me think, oh, she really cares. She really wants to know. And awesome. I thought, this is I'm going to test this opportunity. Right. And I just told them. And like the rest of the time, like we had talked about all of their stuff, what they were going through, and they just prayed for me and our family. And for pastors to open themselves up to that kind of care, I've had probably one of the best weeks I've had since we've been at home. It's been 56 days for our family this week. And I attribute a lot to it of taking the risk of allowing people in your community to actually care for you. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that and to honor them for their diligence in prayer for our community.
That's so important, Sean, because it takes vulnerability for a pastor to really be honest and answer that question in an honest way when they're asked how they're doing. And so thank you for modeling that and for sharing that story to encourage so many pastors that are watching today that need to honestly answer that question to some folks that really care in their church. Well, Rhesa and Sean, thank you so much for your time and all that you're doing for the kingdom and caring for pastors and church leaders around the country. We are so thankful for both of you. So thank you so much.
Thanks
for having us.